Welcome to part 25 of my basic series in the Blender game engine. In this video, I'm going to be talking about how to create a point-and-click style adventure game similar to the gameplay mechanics of a game called Monkey Island. Monkey Island is a classic video game for the PC where you would control a character not with the WASD keys, but instead by clicking with your mouse cursor on different items or sections on the screen to make your character go to that location, or to go to that object that you clicked on, or to go towards a person so that you can start talking to them. So it's not a real-time sort of a action-based first-person game. It's a game where you are exploring a world. If your character walks up to an object, they might use it. In this case, we're going to take this world where I have a character and two treasure chests, and my character will be able to go and walk up to the treasure chests just by clicking on each one once from where he is on the screen or from one to the other, and the treasure chest will go ahead and open up. So this is a simple game mechanic that's not only used or was used in classic video games like Monkey Island or those games, it's also used in modern games, often in cell phone games, where you just tap on a object or a location on the screen to make your character move from point A to point B or over to that object or person, and they'll go there because it's hard to control objects or characters on a phone because you don't have any buttons to press. Of course, if you want to follow along with me in this video, you can go ahead and download this exact file that's on the screen right now. You'll find a link to download this file in the description area below this video on YouTube. Go ahead and download that file for free and follow along with me in this video. We'll create the basic mechanics for a point-and-click adventure. Of course, if you like this video, please go ahead and click on that like button below this video on YouTube. And if you want to see more videos just like this one in Blender and Tech, click on that subscribe button as well. That will really help out me and this channel. And thank you again for watching. Let's go ahead and take a look at this file. Assuming that you're following along with me, this file is set up to look decent when you go ahead and press P to play your game. There you can see the character falls down onto this ground. My ground has a UV grid, I think that's what it's called, UV grid image that's been put onto the floor of a flat, just plain object. I'll put a link on the screen right now to how to add image textures into your game, including with transparency. So if you don't know how to do that for the Blender game engine, I'll put a link to that on the screen right now. You can see at the top right. This character is from a few videos. We created this character, which can walk and can idle, which means that it can kind of stand there and wait for you to do something while rocking back and forth. We created that in a tutorial earlier in the series in which we created a platformer game. So I'll put a link to that video on the screen right now. Later on, a few videos later, we made the same character be able to shoot with a gun, and so you could walk around while shooting, or you could stand still while you were idling and you could fire as well. So I'll put a link to that video on the screen right now if you want to go ahead and check it out. This file also has a lamp. So the lamp is hidden. If you look up here in the outliner window, if I click this little eye next to the lamp, you'll see that it's a sun lamp. And my file is set up to use GLSL lighting. My computer is fairly modern, so if you're working with a very old 32-bit computer, you might not be able to see this file the way that I see it, but hopefully you can. I'm going to go ahead and hide that lamp so we don't have to see it. I also made these trunks or treasure chests for this video, and I've made them locked with 2 of their degrees or axes of rotation. So if you tap R, you can make the trunk open, or you can press escape, of course, to close it. My character has a controlling box, and it's apparent, this box is apparent, of my character's armature. The armature actually has a few actions you can use. So with my dope sheet window open and my action editor mode selected, in fact, if you don't have that up, I'm going to go ahead and collapse that. I'll join that. I'm going to make my timeline a bit taller. I'm going to grab this little triangular cross-hatched area and left click and drag it straight down and we're going to change this upper window into an action. Actually a dope sheet window, pardon me, and then we'll change the dope sheet window into its action editor mode. This is where you can create actions with names. Actions are just animations, and you can recall them as long as you've selected fake user. That means that it'll store that action in a file or in your file, even if it's not on any object. So you can see here that I have an idle action, in other words, an animation of my character rocking back and forth, and it'll loop pretty well. I also have a walk animation, so 1 step or 2 steps in a walk cycle. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the beginning, and I'll press the X. Make sure that when you create actions, you press this little F that will make a fake user of the action. So when you close and save, or save and close rather, your file, it will not get deleted from your file. I actually had that problem before I started recording this video. Let's go ahead and press the X to get rid of that action on the character, and I'm going to press A a few times to select all the bones in pose mode, and I'll press Alt-R and Alt-G just to clear out the pose, and I'll change my armature into object mode because we don't have to actually be in pose mode to do what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to make my character box no longer solid, so we can see the character a bit better, and I'm going to change its physics type. But first, with it selected, I'll go to my object tab, and I'm going to change the maximum draw type under the display section from textured to wire. That means it'll only show up as a wire box so I can actually see my character, which is nice. Secondly, I'm going to go to my physics bouncing ball tab, and I'm going to change the character physics type. Right now, if I press P, my character falls. I don't want that to be the case, so I'm going to change physics type from character to sensor. And we haven't really used this physics type very much. Basically, a sensor object can't collide, like can't hit another object, but it can sense when it is colliding, in other words, overlapping or touching another collision bound of another object. So this is the perfect solution for us. Although if I press P now, sensor objects don't have any gravity, so I'm going to go ahead and move my character to the ground. So I'm going to press 1 on my numpad to go to the front view. I'll move him straight down so his feet are on that red line ground, and I'll move him over just a little bit so he's more centered on that 0 point on the x-axis. Great. So now I want to make my character move to the trunk, and I could, do a simple keyframe animation, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to actually use paths. We're going to make our character follow a path to each one of his points. So I'm going to press, with that box selected, I'm going to press Shift S. Shift S will bring up my snap menu. I'm going to say cursor to selected. I want my 3D cursor to go exactly to where the origin point is of that box. So Shift S, cursor to selected. The 3D cursor is right there. And I'm going to press Shift A on my keyboard. I'm going to add a curve, and it's going to be a path. Now, if you're not sure how to use paths to make objects follow along them, I'll put a link to that video that I made in my Blender 2.7 tutorial series on the screen right now. In that video, I show you how to make different objects follow a path, including a camera as well as other objects, and how to make that object stay upright while moving along the path. So if you're not sure how to do that, that might be a better video for you to review. So I've got a path, and it's kind of just in my character. I'm going to move it forward so you can see what a path looks like. It's just a line, but I'm going to make it bigger. So I'm going to tap S, and if I press tab, it goes into that path's edit mode. And here I can see, when you're in edit mode, these little arrows that point in the direction of the path. A path is basically, well, a path, it's a curved line, or a straight line if you don't make it curved, that you can tell an object to move along, and it sort of has animation built into it. So how does this work? Well, I'm actually going to press tab to go back into object mode. I'm going to select my character's cube, and I'm going to press Shift S again, and cursor to selected again, just to make sure my 3D cursor is right in the middle of the character. And I'm going to make the starting point, so I'll press tab, the starting vertice by right-clicking on it. You'll notice that the arrows point from the start point to the end point, and you have to kind of use those. You can't go in the opposite direction or it won't work. So I'm going to select this first vertice in the path, and I'm going to press Shift S, and I'm going to say selection to cursor. It's going to move that point that I've selected to my character's origin. Great. Well, I'm going to go to my top view with the 7 key on my numpad. I'm going to make the end point of that path move to, and I'll press G from my top view. I want to make sure I'm not moving it up and down at all, because I want my character not to go into the ground or start flying. So I'm going to move that, and I'll press G to right in front of this left treasure chest. So now I've got, as you can see, if I press tab, you can see it's a curved path. It will automatically kind of create a curve that follows somewhat your points. I'm going to grab that vertice and put it kind of up there, so that he ends up, the last part of this path ends up walking right up to the trunk. I might move that back a little bit, and I'm going to move that point right about there, and I'm going to move that point so it's staying in the direction that he starts walking from. So yeah, I kind of like that. So how do you make your character actually walk along the path? Well, if I select the cube and I hold Shift and I select the path, I can now press Control P, which is the Set Parent To menu. This is how you parent one thing to another. I can select two things. I could select Path Constraint, which would do exactly what I want, but I'm going to use a simpler option, which is the Follow Path option. And really what this Follow Path option does is it creates a simple parent-child relationship between your character's controller cube and the path. But because a path inherently has animation built into it, it will make the character walk along the board, move along the path. So I'm going to use that one. And now if I scrub along my timeline or my dope sheet, you can see that my character is moving along the path from point A to point B, and I had my character already exactly at the beginning of the path because I used that snap menu with Shift S. Now, how long is it taking to make my character move along the path? Is it going to be different depending on how long the path is? No. By default, all paths are 100 frames long. So whatever you have moving, whatever the scale is, it'll always be 100 frames. You can change that with your path selected. You can go up to the Object Data tab, which will look like that when you have a path selected. And I'm going to change the frames with this path animation section checked or enabled. I'll change frames. I'm going to make this only 50 frames long. Okay, so now if I scrub through, you'll see that my character will get all the way to the end at exactly frame 50, and I have an animation. But do I? Well, no, I don't really have an animation. Yes, it is moving, but this is not a usable action in the game engine. What I have to do is actually bake the action or the animation as I see it on my character's controller cube to keyframes, because I can't have this path actually controlling my character. It wouldn't really work because I want to have lots of paths. I want my character to be able to go from here to the other trunk as well, or between either trunk in either direction. So I can't have a bunch of paths, and I can't kind of take turns controlling my character. I have to have keyframes. So to do that, I'm going to take my character, which has sort of an animation but no keyframes, and I'm going to go to the Object menu at the bottom of the 3D viewport. I'm going to select Animation, and under Animation, I'm going to select Bake Action. Baking an action will take whatever you see of an object movement, and it will make it into keyframes if we choose the right options. So I'm going to click on Bake Action, and we get a pop-up window. We have to remember that we can end our action at a specified value, and it doesn't default to the actual length of whatever you specified before. In our case, we made it an action or animation with 50 frames from the start to the end point of the path. And to make this work, I can actually decide if I want to record a keyframe at every single keyframe. So if I want 50 keyframes, which is sort of overkill, because if you have each keyframe a few keyframes apart, it won't make much difference unless your movement is very complicated. So I'm going to frame step 3 apart. That means I'll only be making an action with every third keyframe set, which is still a lot of keyframes for this. Okay, let's go ahead and check the last few things. Because we've made this cube a parent of the path, we want to clear parents after we make this baked action, and I want to make sure that I'm using visual keying. That's very, very important, otherwise you won't get the keyframes. Visual keying basically means it'll make keyframes based on what we see of the object movement that we have. So I think that's good. We'll press OK. And as you can see, with the cube selected, we can see the action on the character. This character cube under the Object tab no longer has relations. It no longer has a parent. It would have had a parent a few moments ago. And it has 50 keyframes. Let's go ahead and name this action. Now, for this scene, we're going to consider each location or each object where our character could go. It's going to have a different number. We're going to call this first starting location number 1. We're going to call the left trunk number 2, and we're going to call the right trunk number 3. So I'm going to call this action 1 to 2. So I'm going to name this action 1-2, and I'll press enter. And recall that whenever you make an action, you have to press this F button to give that action a fake user. So when you press this X button, like we're about to do right there, it will not get deleted from your Blender file when you save and close and reopen the file later in Blender. Okay, let's go ahead and make another action with the character going to the right trunks, location number 3. So I'm going to take that path. It's still there. I'm going to press tab to go into edit mode. We're going to leave these first 2 points or vertices where they are, but I'm going to grab this one and move it over to right about there. I'm going to grab this one and put it right about there. I'm going to move that one to right there, and maybe I'll move this one over a little bit. I'm working from my top view, and I'm never moving these points down because I don't want my character to go into the ground or start flying. So I think I'm happy with that. Let's go ahead and press tab. I'll do the same process again. I'm going to select my cube. I'll hold shift, right click and select the path, control P, follow path, and I want to test this. So that looks good. It's the same path, so I still have it set to 50. So now I'm going to select just the cube. I'll go to Object, Animation, and Bake Action. I have to make sure that the action is 50 frames long, that we have visual keying selected and clear parent selected, both very important, and I'll press OK. So now I have this action of my character going to position number 3. So let's name this 1 to 3, and let's go ahead and go back to the beginning, and I'll press F to save that, give it a fake user, and press the X to get rid of it. Let's go ahead and save this file. Last but not least, I'm going to make a new path. Actually, no, I won't. I'll just reuse this path. So I'm going to press tab to go into edit mode. I'm going to grab the first point, which is right there, and I'm going to move it up to the other trunk. Same thing with this one. I'll move it up. So that's sort of making that curved line go directly perpendicular with the face of the trunk. If it's like that, my character will kind of end up at a diagonal when they get to the trunk. So I want to make sure the last section is pointed at perpendicularly, if that's a word, to the front of the trunk. And I'm going to move this point right about there. Sure, I kind of like that. Let's press tab to see how we're doing. I like that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my character cube, and actually before I move it, you know what? I'm going to make a little platform for him to stand on, just so we know where he's going to start. So I'm going to press Shift S, and I'll select cursor to selected. That'll put the 3D cursor where he is. I'll press Shift A to bring up the add menu. I'm going to add a cylinder, and I'll make the cylinder a bit bigger. I'll tap S and then click. And now I'll tap S and then Z on my keyboard to squash it down to make it like a big flat kind of home base, if you will. And I'll move that down just so it's sticking up above the ground, and we'll give it a color. Why not? Sure. I'll give it a new material, and we'll make it a nice green color for him to start, and we'll turn off specular, and I'll turn up the emit value a little bit to make it a little bit brighter, because this is a happy video game. Okay, so now I've got this path, and I want to have my character starting at number 2 and going to number 3, or location 2 to location 3. So with the path selected, I'll press tab. I'm going to select that vertice at the end, at the starting position. Remember that these arrows move in the direction the character will move, so they're pointing, you know, to over this way from over that way. So I'm going to press Shift S, and we're going to say cursor to selected, so it'll go to that selected vertice. I'll press tab to go back into object mode. I'll select the character cube. I'm going to press Shift S, and we're going to say selection to cursor, and that'll move the character over there. And I'm just going to rotate my character with the R key from the top view. So now they're facing in the direction, or away from the trunk and in the direction of that path. And let's go ahead and parent the character's cube to the path, Control P, follow path, and let's see how my character is doing. In this case, it's a bit of a longer line, I think, so I'm going to make the path's frames take up more. We're going to say 60 frames just to do something a little bit different. So now it'll take 60 frames to get from number 2 to number 3. Yeah, it finishes at frame 60. And let's go ahead and bake that animation. So object, animation, and bake action. We have to make sure that it's 60 frames long now. It has visual keying, and that looks pretty good. Clear parents. Yeah. Okay, so let's name this action. This is 2 to 3, and I'm going to speed through. I'm going to speed up this part of the video. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a 3 to 2, and I can kind of cheat here. If I press tab with my path selected, and I go over to my tool shelf, which is this little plus or the T key, you can see that in edit mode, I can switch the direction of my path. So now the little arrows are pointing in a different direction or in the opposite direction. So now I can select, I can select the first vertex, Shift S, cursor to selected, and then select my cube, Shift S, selection to cursor. I can go to my top view, rotate my character 180 degrees. In fact, yeah, I'll just eyeball it here. And before I start parenting or anything, I'm going to name this action. It is 2 to 3. I can press F and get rid of it because that's the other one. And I can just about parent it. So I'm going to speed this part of the video up. You're going to see me bake the action and save it as 3 to 2. Alright, so I finished creating the action of my character moving from 3 to 2. I've gone ahead and clicked the F to make that action have a fake user, and we're about to press X to hide it. Just a few notes here that I discovered as I was doing this last action. Make sure that your playhead, make sure your green playhead is at frame 0 before you're about to do anything here. So make sure that it's at frame 0 before you parent your character controller cube to the path, because if you don't have it at frame 0, your character will kind of jump off and not be following exactly where they should be. It'll still be following the path, but not at the location where you specified. It's a weird sort of thing that is just true about parenting objects to path in Blender. And make sure that you're at frame 0 when you go ahead and select object, animation, and bake, and make sure you only have your character's cube selected and not the path as well. You're not baking animation onto the path. In this case, I actually did, so I'll press the X. I made that mistake. Make sure that you're only baking the action that's on your character controller cube. Alright, so let's go ahead and press the X to get rid of that 3 to 2 action. And I'm going to put my character back at position number 1 on that green circle. So I'm going to just eyeball it here. I'll press 7 to go to my top view, and I'll press G to grab my character controller box, and I'll put him right about there. With that cube selected, I'm going to press Alt R to clear his rotation, but he's actually pointing in the wrong direction. He's pointing down or that way instead of pointing up. So I'm going to press R and then 180 and press enter. So it's at this point that we need to program the clickability of objects. So what I'm actually going to be doing here is I'm going to put an invisible cube over my objects, because this trunk is actually a few objects. It's not just the bottom, it's the bottom and the lid. So I'm going to select the trunk bottom, and I'm going to press Shift S on my keyboard. Shift S will bring up the snap menu. I'm going to say cursor to selected, and now I'll press Shift A on my keyboard. I'm going to add a mesh cube. I'm going to tap S to make the cube bigger so it encompasses the entire trunk, and I'll go to my top view, and I'm going to rotate it so it matches the rotation of the trunk. But I'm actually going to go to the Object tab and make sure it'll only show up as a wire mesh so I can see through it. That makes it easier. So I'll put it right about there. I'll scale it up so it just sort of encompasses that end of the path where my character will end up. You'll see why in a little bit, so it's not going to be so small that my character will never touch it. We need the character to actually collide with this box for the later steps. Alright, so what's going to happen here? Well, when I start my game, I want my character, or the player rather, of my game to be able to move their mouse cursor and click on the trunk, or what they think is the trunk, but it'll actually be clicking on this invisible cube, and then that will trigger my controller cube to play that 1 to 2 action. So I'm going to select this cube, and I'm going to make this dope sheet window. I'll split it into 2, so I'll grab this little triangular cross-hatched area, and I'll left click and I'll drag it to the left. So now we have our dope sheet over here and a copy over here, but I'll change the copy into a logic editor window right there. And in here, of course, we're going to add logic bricks. So to this invisible cube, in fact, let's go over to the bouncing ball tab, which is the physics tab. I'm going to change the physics type to, well, we'll leave it as static, but I'm going to change it to a ghost so it doesn't actually collide with other objects in the scene. As well, I want to make sure it's invisible, so I'll click invisible, but it'll still be able to accept clicks, and we wanted it to be a static object. So with the cube selected, I'm going to add a sensor. We're going to add a mouse sensor, and we're going to say when we click our left mouse button, and we also have to, because this doesn't know where our mouse is, we have to say our mouse is also going to be over this object. So both of these things have to be true in order to know that we're actually clicking on the invisible cube. So I'm going to use an AND controller, and we're going to join these two up because your mouse left button has to be pressed down and your mouse has to be over that object. When those two things are both true, when you click on the cube, we have to send out a message to this box to play the appropriate action to make your character go to that location. So I'm going to send out a message. The message actuator is right there. I'm going to connect it up. I'm going to have a message with a subject. We're not going to worry about the to object. The subject is going to be 2. We're sending our character to location number 2. So we'll just use a really, really simple subject here. I'm going to go ahead and name these logic bricks. So I'm going to select the name here. I'm going to say mouse left and mouse over and message 2. And if I collapse these now, you'll get a gist of what they all mean. When your mouse is, your left mouse button is pressed and your mouse is over it, then we'll send out a message with the subject 2. Okay, let's go ahead and make the character actually do that. So with the character selected, we have to listen for a message. It's going to have a subject of 2. And if it hears that message, we want our character to play an action. So I'll connect those up. The action is going to be played. The action is going to be called 1 to 2 because we're moving from location 1 to 2. And we know that that action is 50 frames long. So we have to actually specify the start frame and end frame here. End frame is going to be 50. And I think that should be good. We'll leave that at play because we're not going to loop that. We're just going to play it once. So let's go ahead and see what that does. If I press P to play my game, we don't have a mouse cursor. So I'm going to press escape. I can't actually see the mouse cursor when I play the game. In order to enable that, I'll go to my camera tab, and under the display section, we can check mouse cursor, and that will now enable the mouse cursor when we play. So if I press P to play my game, I can click on the trunk, and my character will move over to the trunk and stop. We just played an action successfully. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for the other trunk. So I'm going to say, actually, we don't have a duplicate cube. So I'm going to take my cube, I'll go to my top view, and I'll duplicate it, Shift D. I'll move it over here, and I'll rotate it. And I'm going to make this one a little bit bigger, actually, because the path ends a little bit farther away where he'll get to there. So I can actually delete that path now. It's not necessary at all. So I'll press X with it selected. Now, when we click on this invisible cube, we want to send out a message 3. And so I'll name this one 3 as well. Let's go and see if that will work. But of course, we have to make our character know about 3. So we're going to add a sensor for a message. It's going to have a subject. We're sensing for a message with a subject 3. I'm going to name this 2 and 3. and it's going to add, or we need to add an action actuator. I'll connect that up. We're going to play 1 to 3, and it has 50 frames. So now, if I test out my game, I can go to 3 now. That's wonderful. But here's a problem. My character is now standing at this treasure chest, but if I click on this trunk, well, it's going to send my character back to the first position because it's going to play no matter what. When I click on this trunk, it's going to play the action on my character of it going from here to here. So how do we stop that? And again, if I click on this one, it'll force that 1 to 2 action, or 1 to 3 action rather. So how do we stop that from happening? Well, we're going to have to let our character know where they are. So I'm going to actually, with my character controller cube selected, I'm going to go down to this properties side panel, and it might be on the other side if you're on a Mac or on a Linux computer. I'm not sure why it's on one side or the other on different computers. I just know that they're not always on the same side. I'm going to select or click on Add Game Property, and this will add a property, otherwise known as a variable, if you're a programmer. And I'm going to make this variable or property an integer. That means a whole number. We can't have decimals in an integer. And I'm going to name it location, LOC for short. And we're going to start it at location 1. Okay, remember our numbers 1, 2, and 3. So now, if this cube hears the call, I'm going to make this action editor window a little bit narrower. If our cube hears the call to go to number 2, it also has to know that if it's at number 1 or where it's going to be. So I'm going to add a sensor here, and I'm going to say, hey, is my property called location, is it equal to 1? And so these two things have to be true. It has to hear true, and so I'll connect these up, and it has to start, or my character has to be at location number 1. So if my character is at or hears the message 2, and it's at location 1, it'll go to the location number 2. Okay, if you follow that through, it goes from 1 to 2. Okay, same thing over here. If my character hears the message 3, and it's at location 1, so I can reuse any logic bricks I want. I'm going to name this logic brick actually, if location is equal to number 1. If you're a programmer, you'll know that equals equals is the comparison for equality operator in most programming languages. So there we are. Those two things have to be true in order for our character to do anything. So now let's go ahead and test that out. If I press P, you'll see that if I click on the trunk, he'll get to the trunk. But now if we click on this trunk, well, we actually haven't updated where our character is. So no matter what, if I go ahead and make this property debuggable, that means if I click this I, what I'm doing here is I'm making it actually show up on the screen. Whatever this location value is, it'll show up on the screen if I click this little I. And if I go up to game and I say show debug properties, if I press P now, you'll see up here in the top left of my screen, it says loc equals 1. Well, if I click on the left trunk, you'll see my character will go there, but it hasn't actually changed its location. So, and neither has it when it goes over to 3. So what we have to do here is if my character collides with this box, we want it to change its location property to be 2. If it collides with this box, it's going to change it to 3. So we need to go ahead and give each of these boxes a property. I'm going to select this one, and we're going to give it a property just with the name 2. I don't care what type it is or what value it has. And with this one, we're going to have a new property. It's going to be property 3. We can use properties with names to detect collisions. So I'm going to select my character controller cube. I'm going to add a sensor. It's going to be a collision sensor. We're going to test to see if it hits an object with the property 2. Well, if it hits an object with the property 2, we want it to set its location to 2. So I'm going to add a property actuator. We'll connect it up. I'm going to change the property we'll be assigned to is called location. It's going to set its location to be at 2. Same thing when it detects that it's collided with something with the property 3. It's going to need to change its location property to be 3. Let's go ahead and connect that. That sounds good and it will work, but it's a problem. If I press P and I click on my left trunk, if I then, in the middle of him moving, click on the right trunk, he'll restart and go to the other trunk. But now I know that his location is 3, so that did work. But now, you know, of course, I'll want to make him be able to go somewhere else. But again, we can still make him glitch if he's not yet at his destination, which is a problem. So we're actually going to add another location, and the location is going to be in transit. We're going to make the in transit location number 0. So in other words, whenever he's in motion, he's going to be in a new location, location 0. So I'm going to add a actuator to his controller box. It's going to set his location property, location to 0, and we want this to be set just after our character has heard either 2 or 3. Basically, you're going to start moving to either 1 to 3 or 1 to 2, and he's going to set his location to 0 before he then collides with the end box, which will be 2 or 3. So I'm going to say location equals 0. I'm going to collapse that. I'm going to move that all the way up to the top because that's where our movement blocks are. And so if he's at location, or if he hears message 2 and he's at location 1, he's going to move from 1 to 2, but he's also going to set his location to 0. And same thing with the next one. If he's at 3 or hears the message 3 but is at location 1, he's going to move from 1 to 3, but he's also going to set his location to 0. And so we're going to see what happens now. If I press P, he's at location 1. If I click on this second box, number 2, you'll see his location set to 0. And now when it hit that invisible box, it went to set his location to value 2. So if I do that again, you'll see he's at location 1. If I click, he's in 0 while he's moving, and now he's at location 3, which is perfect. Let's go ahead and add the last few options before we make our character actually walk and the trunk lids open. So I now have to say, hey, if my character is at location 2, which is this left trunk up here, so add sensor if his property called location, this is on the character, we have that object selected, if the location property is 2, and so I'm going to add an and controller manually, and I'll connect that up. If loc equals 2, and he hears the message 3, so I'll connect that up so you can see what 2 I've connected to the single and. He's going to play an action that is the 2 to 3 action. So I'm going to add an action. It's going to be 2 to 3. We're going to select the action 2 to 3. This one is 60 frames long, and I'll connect that up. Remember that when our character starts moving, we also want to set the location to 0. So I'm going to connect this up to here as well. So now hopefully, I think we're good. Yeah, I think we're fine. If I press P to play my game, and then I go to number 2, and now if I click on 3, yeah, he'll flip around, he'll go to number 3, that works. Now I have to make the opposite true, I have to make him be able to go to from number 3 to number 2. So I'm going to add a logic brick or 2. If his location, add sensor property, if his location is 3, and so I'm going to add an and connect that up, and he hears the message for 2, then he's going to play an action. I'm going to start collapsing these. Location equals 3, location equals 2. I'll put some spaces in there and make it look nice. 1, 2, 3, and 1 to 2, and 2 to 3. So now we need to make an action, and it's going to be 3 to 2. 3 to 2, I'll name it, and we have to make sure we specify the frames, and I can connect that up. And of course, as always, if we're moving, we're in location 0. So there we are. Let's go ahead and see if that all works. If I save, let's go ahead and save and click. I'm going to go ahead and press P. If I select or click on number 3, he should go to number 3. I should be able to go from 3 now to 2. And I should be able to go back to number 3. We don't have a reverse to go from 3 to 1 or from 2 to 1, and that's okay. That's in the design limitations of my game, so I'm not going to worry about that. So at this point, we want our character to be able to walk, and we actually have a walk action built into this file. If you go into the head and download this file from the description area, I'll build this video on YouTube. So if I select my character's armature, we are in object mode, not pose mode. That doesn't really matter. I'm going to go ahead and make this logic editor window narrower for a moment so we can see our action editor or dope sheet window again. We have an idle action, which is 80 frames or 0 to 80. And if I scrub through, you can see it's just him kind of, swaying back and forth, and it plays nicely if you loop it. And I'll press the X. And if we also have a walk animation, which is 20 or 0 to 20 frames long, which is 2 steps, which will loop nicely. That's great. So I'm going to use those. I'm going to call upon those. And so I'll get rid of it. In fact, if I go back to frame 0 now, I'll go into my character's armature's pose mode, and I'll press A a few times to select all the bones. I'll press Alt-R. Alt-R will clear all the bones' rotation, and Alt-G will clear their location back to the defaults. So now I'll go back to object mode, just so you can see how you can clear the location because our character's limbs were posed. So now they're reset back. What I want to do here is I want to give my armature some states. I want to give it a walking state, and I want to give it an idle state. So I'm going to go ahead and select my armature, and I'm going to give it a property in the logic editor window. So I'm going to click on add game property, and it's going to be a integer property. We only want to use whole numbers, and I'm going to call this property state. What states is he going to be able to be in? Well, state 0 is going to be walking to match the state or location 0 of him being in transit. So I'm going to start him at state, and we're going to set the value to 1. And 1 is going to be idle. So I'm going to say, with the armature selected, we're going to add some logic here. We're going to say if the property called state is equal to 1, then I want this object to play an action, and I'll connect those up, called idle, and that idle action is 80 frames long, and this one is going to be a loop. So we're going to say loop stop, and I'm going to uncheck continue. So now if I press P, because I set his state to 1, and because it says if the state's 1, loop stop this action, he's going to be doing his little idle animation. Great. Let's create another state. Let's go ahead and say if that state property is equal to 0, I want to play an action called walk, and it is 20 frames long, or 0 to 20. Let's go ahead and connect that up. And so let's go ahead and press P. Well, we have to have a way to get there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say if I click on a box, I want it to shout out a message for my armature to start walking. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new second message. We're shouting out 2, but I want a generic one for my character that'll be the same every time to tell him to start walking. So I'm going to say shout out a message. It's going to be an add actuator message, and we'll connect it up so it shouts out 2. And I'm going to set a message that says walk exclamation mark just for fun. And we're not going to specify a 2. That's fine. So I'm going to say walk, and I'll collapse that. So now if my armature hears the message walk exclamation mark, it's going to know to switch over its state property from 1 to 0. So I'm going to add a message sensor. If it hears walk exclamation mark, the exclamation mark is just for fun. Then we're going to say go ahead and change the state property. Whoops, that's the state actuator. We want the property actuator to change the state property to 0. And let's go ahead and connect that up. So let's go and see if that works. I'm going to go ahead and I'll leave that up so you can see it and copy it for yourself. If I press P to play my game and then click on a trunk, or this left trunk, you can see that he starts walking. I forgot to change my walk action to be a loop stop. And so let's go and see if that works. He's idling. If he clicks, he starts walking. And I haven't said yet what happens or how to make him stop walking and go back to idle. How we're going to do that is I'm going to select each one of these blocks and I'm going to give them a new property. They're going to have a property called target. I don't care what the type of property is or what value it has. It's going to be called target. I'm going to select this one and give it the same property, add game property, target. And so we're going to say with this object selected, if it ever hits, or actually this object, if it ever hits an object with the property target, it's going to send a message to the armature to go back to idle. So I'm going to select my cube and it's going to have a collision sensor. And if it ever hits an object with target, and I'll rename it as well, target. And if it ever hits an object with target, location is equal to 3. I'm just going to quickly go ahead and name all these collision 2, hit 2, and yeah, I can go ahead and collapse these. And I'm going to go ahead and name this hit 3 and collapse that one just to make them both the same. So if my cube ever hits anything with the property target, it's going to shout a message to the armature. We can actually specify an object to send a message to. It's going to say, be called idle, exclamation mark. And so I can connect those up. So if it hits an object with a property target, which is any target invisible box, it's going to shout idle to the armature. And now if our armature hears a message with idle, IDLE, exclamation mark, I'll name it as well, it's going to change the state property, not the state actuator, but the property actuator, to 1. And so now I'll connect this up. There is going to be one glitch here, and you're going to see what it is right away. I'm going to go ahead and leave those up, but you'll see up here what I'm doing. In fact, I'm going to scroll down a little bit and make it a little bit smaller down there so you can see up here. Let's go ahead and try this out. I'm idling, that's fine. I'm going to click on a trunk. He's going to walk, and then he doesn't idle. Why is that? Let's go ahead and press escape. Let's try the other one. He's idling just fine. Great. Oh. No, he didn't even start walking. What's going on here? Well, I'm not actually sure about that second one. But what needs to happen here is our actions need to be prioritized. We saw this when we made our original platformer game earlier in this video series, where we need to change this priority. Idling needs to have a greater priority over top of walking. So when your character's walking and it's told again to start idling, it'll take priority over top of walking. So with these priorities, the lower the number, the higher the priority. Okay, so 0 has priority over 1, so I'm going to change walk to 1, so idle will take precedence over walking. Let's go ahead and try that out. That should work. Crossing my fingers here. My character is idling. I'm going to go ahead and click on the box. My character starts walking, and great, my character is back to idling. Let's go ahead and press escape. I'll try that again, and let's see. Oh, my character hasn't been told to walk. Why is that? I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and I'll come back in just a sec. Okay, of course, I actually modified the actions on this invisible box on the left trunk. I added a message to tell my character to walk when I click on it, and so I didn't do the same thing on this number 3 invisible box. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to copy the logic bricks from this trunk box over to this trunk box. And I can't remember which order I have to select them in, so I'm going to try the original one first without the logic that I want to copy from. I'm going to hold shift and right click on this box. And now if I go up to object and then game and then copy logic bricks, no, that was the opposite. So I'm going to have to press Control Z and then select the 2 box first, hold shift, select the from box and object and game and copy logic bricks. There we go. So now if I select only one of the objects, you'll see it has walk now, and this one also has the walk command. Of course, I have to make sure that I shout a different message, so both of them have number 2. I need to change this one back to number 3. Just like that, both the name and the actual subject. So now if I go ahead and try my game out, I'll press P, he's idling. If I click, he'll go to 2. If I click on number 3, he'll go to number 3 and start idling. I can go back and forth to my heart's content, but it's all working pretty well. You'll notice the character sort of jumps from his walking to idling. The way we can stop that from happening is because the character goes from walking and then gets taken over by a higher priority idling, I can actually change the blend in value on the idling. So if I change this blend in value up to, let's say, 5, it'll take 5 frames to blend from walking to idling. So let's go and see what that looks like. My character's idling, they're gonna walk, and there you can see it was a nicer, smoother transition. We'll see that again. Yeah, so it wasn't so bad, it wasn't quite such a jump. Let's go ahead now and make sure the trunks can actually open when you get to them. So let's go ahead and select one of the trunk lids, and I'm gonna add a new sensor. It's gonna have a message sensor, and it's gonna listen for a message that says open, exclamation mark, just for fun. And when it hears the open exclamation mark message, it's gonna play an action that we're gonna have to create. Let's go ahead and set this up. For now, I'm going to go ahead and go back to my dope sheet window because I want to create an action of my trunk lid staying closed for a few keyframes and then opening, just to give a little bit of delay, some suspense. So let's go ahead, and with the trunk lid selected, I'm going to press I to insert a keyframe. I will bring up the insert keyframe menu. I'm going to select rotation because we don't want other types of keyframes. And as you can see now in the dope sheet, on frame 0, I have a keyframe. I'm going to go to frame 10. I'm going to do the same thing. I'll go up here, I'll tap I and rotation. So now I have a chunk of time with this orange bar. That means there's no movement of my trunk lid just staying still. Okay, so now let's say it'll take 20 frames for the trunk lid to open. So we'll get from frame 20 or 10 rather to 30. So I'll go to frame 30 and I'll tap R to rotate. And again, because I've locked these two axes on this trunk and I've set the rotation correctly so that, you know, it'll work just nicely for us. So now I'll tap R and then let's say about like that. And now I'll tap I to insert a rotation keyframe. So now I've got an action of my trunk lid waiting and then opening. That's great. I'm going to call this lid open. And I have to make sure that I press this F to save with a fake user. And now I'll go back to the frame 0 to make sure the trunk lid is closed again before I press the X to get rid of that action. But again, it has a fake user, so it's not going to go away if I save and close this file. Let's go ahead and do a quick save. We're almost done with this trunk lid selected. I'll go back to my logic editor window. And when it hears the message open, it's going to play that lid open action. It is going to be 30 frames long. It's just going to play it once, and once it's finished playing, it's just going to stay at its final position, which is going to be open. That's great. So how do we actually make it open the trunk lid? Well, it's going to open the trunk lid when we detect a collision between our character's box and the outer box, which means we're going to use a message. The outer box, again, is a property that's unique to it called to. So I'm going to say when this box, the character controller, hits 2, which is right here, let's go and see what it already does. It will set the location, its location property to 2, but we also want to shout out to that lid open exclamation mark. So I'm going to add an actuator. It's going to be a message actuator. It's going to be to a specific object. It's going to be to, we have to name that object under the object tab. I'm going to call it lid 2, and this one will be lid 3, and we have to send a message to lid 2, and it's going to be open exclamation mark. And so when we hit 2, it's going to set its location to 2, and it's going to open lid 2. Same thing with lid 3. If we hit 3, it needs to shout a message to lid 3, and it's going to be open exclamation mark. And so if we hit 3, it's that one. It's going to set its location to 3, and it's going to open lid 3. And so let's go ahead and see if this all works. I'm just going to check that it's okay on this one. It's 30 frames long. It's going to be listening for open. And so now what I can do is, or what it should do, and I can never remember when I copy these over, do I select the from first? I think so. And I select the 2. I'm going to copy my logic bricks. So object, game, and copy logic bricks. No, it's the other way around. I always get it wrong. Object, and game, and copy logic brick. So now this one will hear the message open, same exact thing. We don't have to worry about a to or object. It's just going to hear the same message, and it's going to play the same action, but on this object, so it will work. Let's go ahead and see if this all works. I'm going to go ahead and press P to play my game. My character will idle. I'll click on the left trunk, and the trunk should open. There we go. And my character can now walk over to this trunk, and that trunk will open. The last thing I'll do here is I'm going to fix a problem where if I go back to the second trunk, it plays again. I want to stop that from happening. So I'll press escape. I'm going to create a property on each trunk. So I'm going to add a property. It's going to be a Boolean property. That means basically a light switch, an off and on, a true or false switch. And I'm going to call this visited. It's a bit hard to spell. Visited. There we go. And I'm going to set it to false. That means this checkbox is going to be not there. Same thing over here. Add game property. We're going to call it, or set it to Boolean. It's going to be called visited. Yeah, and it's going to be false. So what I have to do here is, and I'll select the left one first, is if it hears the message open, and so I'm going to add a property sensor here, and the visited value is false. You have to type F-A-L-S-E with no capital letters and no spaces and nothing else, and we'll connect that up. So these two things have to be true. It has to hear open, and it has not have to be, or it cannot be visited prior to this. Then we'll play this lid open action. And if it plays a lid open action, we want to set visited to true. So I'm going to set set the property visited to TRUE, all lowercase, no spaces, nothing funny, and connect it up. So that should work. Let's go ahead and see if I can remember which order to copy in. We're going to copy the new logic bricks over to the old ones. Let's see. I'm going to get this wrong, I'm sure. Object, game, copy logic bricks. Oh, I got it right, I think. Yeah, this one now has those same 2 logic bricks. Great, let's go ahead and see if this all works. I'll leave it on the screen in case you need to pause the video and catch up. I'll press P to play. Let's go ahead and click on, let's do this one first this time. My character will walk over to it and open it up. And let's go ahead and visit this one. And hey, look, you can open it up. Let's go back to this one. And hopefully nothing should happen, and nothing does happen. So I can visit both now, even though I've visited them once already, and my character has a pretty good game mechanic now. That will be it for this video. Thanks for watching, and of course if you like this video, if you learned something, go ahead and click on that like button below this video on YouTube. That really helps me out. And if you want to see more videos just like this one in Blender and Tech, click on that subscribe button as well. Check out my Facebook page at facebook.com/borncg. On that page I post sneak peeks and previews of what I'm working on next in my upcoming tutorials, and I also answer people's questions, and I ask questions of you, my viewers and subscribers, so go ahead and check that page out. Thanks again for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.